Oh, 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 way down we go. Say way down we go.
So,
We think that's nonsense.
Couple things. First, parallax is not. This is not parallax.
The sun's rays from 92. Sorry, you're right. My bad. The parallel rays, right? 92 million miles away, the sun's rays come in parallel, but we don't see them parallel.
Very, very nearly parallel. Yes.
Yeah, we disagree with that entirely. But let's see here. So, my two examples that really brought me over was the sun in front of the clouds with filters in front of and behind clouds, and how all the stars circulate in perfect time and perfect synchronicity year over year around Polaris. If we're spinning around, let's see, how fast are we going around the sun? I think it's 1 million miles, 666,000 miles around the sun, 300 and something thousand miles around Milky Way galaxy, and we're spinning, rotating, but every star stays the same in a perfectly circular pattern above our head since the beginning of recorded time. Odd.
But they're not. They're not exactly the same.
What do you mean?
They move. They're in a different place all the time.
Well, if you look at where they are, if you look where they are right now today, and then you look at 1 year from now, it'll be in exactly the same spot.
No, they're not. In fact, they all move.
So how do they do the annual calendar and prediction of the eclipses and all that stuff if the calendar is not to be relied upon?
Well, the calendar and the eclipses don't have anything to do with the precise positioning of the stars. So
the calendar is exactly the position of the stars, isn't it?
No, it's not. You claimed that the stars don't move, and I can simply show you documentation of the stars moving over time.
They go circular in a circular pattern in a perfect circle around us, right? Like this.
So you didn't go into this particular rabbit hole. I mean, you're sharing now, but so I can't. But Polaris, for example, is the North Star, and I have 150 years of documentation of Polaris. So in 1850, it was 88 degrees 30 arc minutes in position, which is about a 1.5 degrees from the center of rotation. In 1900, which is 50 years later, it was 88 degrees 46 arc minutes, so about 1/4 of a degree closer to the center of rotation. In 2017, it was at 89 degrees 20.3 arc minutes, which is less than a degree. It's about 2/3 of a degree from the center of rotation. So the documentation of the movement of the stars is not difficult to find. It's in the nautical almanacs because their positions are quite important.
What was your earliest date there that you tracked the position of Polaris?
1850 for this particular documentation that I have. It's at mctoon.net/Polaris.
Have you heard of the Georgia Guidestones?
Georgia Guidestones are about 3 or 4 degrees wide, and they've only been there for 30, 40, 50 years, something like that.
Since the 80s, I think.
Yeah,
right?
so the margin of error of the Georgia Guidestones are somewhere in the range of 4 degrees. The measurements that I gave you are better than 1 arc second of margin of error. An arc second is 3,600.
It seems that all of this would be irrelevant because you have to prove Coriolis effect.
That has nothing to do with this topic. So let's stay
Absolutely,
on the same
it does. You have
It's
to prove axial rotation in order to assume that the stars are in place all the time.
It's a totally
Fair
different
enough.
topic.
But there's a hole in the Georgia Guidestone, a little hole right in the middle.
Yeah,
That
like I
right
said,
when it
it's
was
like
made that sees
4
Polaris right.
degrees wide.
And we think that. So you're of the belief that our North Star changes over the thousands of years?
It's not a belief; it's documented.
It's written in a textbook for sure.
It is factually measured. Yes.
How would you prove that yourself outside of a textbook? Just curious.
I mean, you could go if you disagree
Yeah,
with it.
did you get in a time machine and go back to 1850 and measure it yourself?
He had asked me a question. I'll answer it, then you can come back up with that, crackers.
Yes, sir.
So, if you disagreed with it, this is a basic tenet of science. If you disagree with it, then the door is open for you to show that something is wrong. So if you think it's wrong, then definitely show that it's wrong. So you would then maybe want to go get a angle measuring device, maybe a nice telescope that can measure to 1 arc second and see where it is in from year to year. So
But how would
Polaris.
you verify that it was 2,000 years ago different than it is now? How would that ever be verified by one of our generation besides looking in the same
Well, of
textbook?
course, you couldn't personally do it, and science doesn't expect that you can personally do everything. You look at the documentation, you evaluate the evidence, you look to see that many different sources over time have confirmed the same information.
I mean, to us, if we can't prove it ourselves, we kind of put it in the maybe category. And if they tell us that 2,000 years ago Polaris wasn't where it is now, cool story,
I don't know
bro.
why I keep bringing up 2,000 years ago. I only cited 150 years ago.
I'm just because I know that the story of Polaris is that it shifts over a great period of time, but our human existence is short, not too short to notice it, essentially, right? So the change we wouldn't notice in our lifetime.
Definitely not too short to notice. You could definitely get a measuring device that's accurate to 1 arc second. We call them theodolites, and then you could measure the position of Polaris yourself. You could do it yourself. If you thought it was wrong, then
I'm not saying it's wrong. It's never
absolutely,
changed.
absolutely, you go crazy and show that all of these people whose careers sit on the positioning of the stars being accurate, and that they know it.
Oh,
they
maybe
deal
that's
with
part
it.
of the
They
problem.
work with it. That is their field of study, and they sit on and. But absolutely, it would be fantastic if you thought it was wrong to show that it's wrong. But just saying "nuh-uh"
Right.
isn't
I'm not saying
actually
it's
valid.
wrong. I'm saying where it is now is where it's always been, and no one can prove otherwise. That's what I'm saying. You can't measure it in your lifetime an arc second. It doesn't vary. It's been there.
Yes,
it will
you
never
can.
move.
All you're just saying "nuh-uh." That's all you have is "nuh-uh."
And light years away. In this sort of layout, you would never expect to see permanent proximity of these stars, since again, we're allegedly traveling through space with the sun, and the stars visible in the sky are supposedly flying through space at similar ludicrous speeds as well. The last thing you would expect to see are permanent clusters of stars which never change relative positions to one another. Now, aside from this major problem with the standard theory of space, we have an even bigger problem when it comes to Polaris, the North Pole star itself. This is due to the fact that Polaris is unique in the respect that all the other stars make daily circuits around it. It's claimed that this phenomenon is directly resultant from Polaris's near-perfect alignment to our alleged axis of rotation. Of course, if you consider the ball-Earth model, if you're facing north and observing Polaris at sunset, you'd be facing in the opposite direction towards space 12 hours later when observing Polaris just before sunrise. These two angles give us a triangle, with the equator or respective latitude line being the base of the triangle. If you map this observable data into 3D AutoCAD software, which is extremely accurate, it shows that Polaris is only a few 100,000 miles above the Earth according to such triangulation data. This simply will not do when it comes to the ball-Earth theory, as Polaris is alleged to be quadrillions of miles away, not mere hundreds of thousands. As Polaris is proven by simple triangulation to be much closer than purported by theoretical astrophysics, even assuming a ball-Earth, this is a huge problem for the standard theory. Furthermore, since the Earth is allegedly in motion, as is the Sun, you'd certainly not expect to see Polaris as central to all the other stars over the course of thousands of years. Again, this is because when you're facing towards Polaris, say at sunset, you have one leg of a triangle, and 12 hours later at sunrise, or just before sunrise, you'd be facing in sort of the opposite direction towards space, creating another leg of the triangle, and of course the equator, or whichever latitude line applies, would be the base of that triangle. So if you move the Earth millions of miles, as claimed by the globe Earth theory, it doesn't seem feasible that you would have this perfect triangulation on Polaris, which has never even budged a smidgen over thousands of years. But this is truly only the beginning of the problems with Polaris and the ball-Earth theory. The Earth allegedly undergoes a 26,000-year wobble cycle. This means that the Earth's axis of rotation would necessarily be in constant flux, and certainly couldn't point towards Polaris for thousands of years. This alleged wobble in the Earth's axis demands that we absolutely cannot have a stable or permanent North Star in perpetual alignment with our hypothetical axis of rotation. If the Earth's axis is wobbling through space along a long-term precession circle, the most obvious evidence for such axial precession would necessarily be found in whichever star is aligned to the axis. So if Polaris is aligned to our axis right now, in 20 or 40 years from now, we should see a measurable, permanent change in the centrality of Polaris, as the alignment we have right now simply will be misaligned after a few decades of precession. The Earth's axis is claimed to be phasing through a 26,000-year wobble or precession cycle, which demands that our axis should never be aligned to a single star or a single point in space for longer than a couple of decades at the most. If the Earth is wobbling once every 26,000 years, as they claim, then we should see a single-degree change in the alignment of our axis over 72 years, or a quarter of a degree in just 18 years. In truth, we have never seen any change in this alleged alignment between our axis and Polaris, meaning the ball-Earth theory yet again fails to match observable reality. This argument is completely separate and independent of the concept of parallax, which is again explained away by the incomprehensible distance to the stars. Now, in this case, with the alignment of our axis towards Polaris, the further you place Polaris, the worse the problem becomes. So the unimaginable distance to Polaris actually exacerbates the problem as opposed to apologizing for the issue. Now, this has to do with the alleged angle which our axis is pointed off into space. This angular alignment between the Earth's hypothetical axis and Polaris, some quadrillions of miles away, must necessarily be extremely precise. So again, the further you place Polaris, the more precise the alignment must be. By its nature, even such a sluggish transition in this axial alignment, again, that's 1 degree over 72 years, this sluggish transition would demand the night sky appear dramatically different from one century to the next. To test this claim, one need only begin a cursory study in alignments. If 3 points in space are aligned to one another, even a very slight motion of one or more of the points will necessarily result in the loss of this original alignment. This is another one of those self-evident, immutable laws of nature which must be completely ignored to continue one's belief in the ball-Earth theory. The ball-Earth theory demands that the world be in motion through the galaxy, zipping through the cosmos at some millions of miles per hour, with the galactic frame of reference. At the same time, the Sun is alleged to be making circuits around the center of the galaxy at nearly 500,000 miles an hour, while the Earth makes circuits around the Sun at nearly 70,000 miles per hour at a 60-degree angle to the Sun's alleged path of travel. Furthermore, these alleged velocities would be following curvilinear trajectories, which means that angular acceleration or centrifugal force would necessarily be present at all times and would be phasing through different angular relationships between the two orbital paths, and would thus manifest itself perceivably to our senses, measurably to our tools of physics, and yet no evidence, no measurement has ever been taken of this alleged motion around curvilinear orbital paths. No such motion has ever been observed or measured, but is only a matter of theory, and indeed a matter of necessity for the globe-Earth theory. So in other words, this motion must exist, even though there is no evidence for it. It is purported to exist because it must exist for the theory to hold water. It is this sort of illogical anti-science which has been allowed to be taught in schools as scientific fact, but is nothing more than conjecture built on top of theory founded upon the Copernican principle or the mediocrity principle.
We think outside the cage where our brains have been placed. The true history of the world has been changed and erased. It's 1984, these things are so Orwellian. Big brother, motherfucker, super totalitarian. Your thoughts being suggested, your speech being suppressed, always being corrected, freedom being oppressed, always under surveillance, in a state of unrest. And if you protest it, they put your ass under arrest.
We are truthers. We do not take shit from mockingbirds.
You should have expected us.